Something a little bit different today, and a whiskey from a category that I unapologetically neglect a little bit. This is Jamesons. It's an Irish whiskey, and it's an Irish triple distilled blend. So, a little bit of backstory. I used to buy this stuff fairly regularly, but quite a long time ago, probably around 2005-ish, this used to be one of my kind of go-to cheap whiskies. And when I say cheap, one of the reasons why I used to buy this is because the local shop near where I used to live used to have this stuff on almost a perpetual offer about, I think it was about £13 for a 700ml bottle, which I think even back then was quite reasonable. So I tended to use it as kind of my house whiskey, as my kind of go-to, whether I wanted something affordable to sip or something to use as a mixer. It kind of ticked all boxes. I remember it being quite smooth, sweet, fruity, and just generally pleasant. But that thing happened that happens to probably most of us that have a whiskey that they come to depend on, that they buy again and again over the years. And I started to notice a little bit of a change in my Jamesons blended Irish whiskey. And I really stopped buying it after I had a couple of bottles that seemed to me to be getting a little bit more on the young side in their flavour profile. A little bit more young, a little bit more spirity, to the point where I had one bottle and it really had quite a strong acetone, raw ethanol note to it. So considering that this used to be one of my go-tos, I'm really interested and excited to see if this stuff has improved. So, as I said, Jameson's Irish whiskey. Jameson's is probably the most well-known out of all the Irish whiskey brands worldwide. They've been around kind of for a very long time, since 1780. I'll show you a close-up of the label for what it's worth, so you can hit pause and have a look at that if you really want to. You've probably all seen it. Jamesons have a long history. They kind of used to be the main distillery in Dublin, the capital city of the Republic of Ireland, and they were situated on Bow Street in Dublin since 1780. That's not where this stuff is made at the moment though. The distillery on Bow Street in Dublin was closed and rebuilt as the new Middleton Distillery in County Cork in 1976. You can, confusingly, for anyone that's been to Dublin, still go on a distillery tour in Dublin, but it's really more of a sort of curated, guided museum experience on the grounds of the old Jameson's distillery that used to be there many decades ago, and there's currently no production still occurring anywhere near the city. It's also worth mentioning the triple distilled part on the label there. Triple distillation is something it really goes hand in hand with Irish whiskey. It has a long association with Irish whiskey, and a lot of Irish whiskey is still triple distilled, although not all modern Irish whiskies are still running triple distillation. It has been suggested that triple distillation was originally done in Ireland to distill out the influence of unmalted barley in the mash bill, and that unmalted barley originally being added to basically avoid tax. But that actually didn't happen for very long. The tax break on whiskey made using a portion of unmalted barley, that tax break was removed quite early on, but for whatever reason by then unmalted barley and triple distillation were kind of an integral part of Irish whiskey, and a lot of those distilleries continued the practice. Despite me saying that on several occasions that I'm not the biggest Irish whiskey fan in the world, I do think that Irish whiskey is a little bit underestimated and a little bit kind of neglected, because Irish whiskey used to be a really big thing. Back in the early 19th century, there were actually 93 Irish distilleries, and Irish whiskey was at one point the most popular spirit in the world, back at a time when Scottish whiskey was still really only being made on a very small and localised scale. By the 1970s though, those 93 distilleries had been whittled down to just two. New Middleton Distillery, so the rebuilt Jameson's distillery, and Old Bushmills, which at the time were both owned by the sole remaining whisky company in Ireland, Irish Distillers. So I always kind of think that the way that Irish whisky went from sort of humble beginnings to quite quickly becoming the big player in world whisky worldwide, larger than Scotch is today, arguably, to almost disappearing over basically a century. I think that's probably a fact that would be well remembered by a lot of certain Scotch whisky companies who seem to think that they can get away with cutting quality and increasing prices at the same time. Anyway, that's enough prophecies and doomsaying. Jameson's triple distilled Irish blended whisky. Let's see if it's any good. I think they have done a good job with the presentation. I think that it's an attractive presentation. It's one that everyone recognises. And they've not messed around with it too much. They've basically kept it the same for decades and decades. It is a screw top, as you would expect. And that's fine. You can get this stuff now. Still, you can get it for well under... Well, not well under. You can get it for like £18, £19 when it's on offer here in the UK. So it's a very affordable whisky. Is it natural colour and non-chill filtered? Absolutely not. It's not a quality craft presentation, but nobody buying this expects that. So yeah, on the nose, quite grainy, getting quite a note of coconut, refined sugar, a little bit of a sweet artificial vanilla note, so all kind of notes that I would associate with grain whisky. So at least superficially, not a huge amount of evidence that there's a lot of pot still whisky gone into this. Not getting anything which is akin to single malt. It is very much a grainy, economy column still produced, cheap grain whisky. Pleased to say that the acetone note that I remember as the reason why I stopped buying this has disappeared. It's not to say that it's all wonderful, but I'd say perhaps not an acetone note on the nose of this whisky now, but there's definitely still a slight spirity ethanol note. It definitely smells like it's young. It smells like it's 3 years old, which it probably is. I think if you really get your nose in there, you start to get a few more flavour, more aroma notes. If you sniff really deep, you start to get a little bit of a spicy grassiness on the nose. But it's really very light. And it noses like a cheap Scottish grain whisky, or perhaps a particularly grain-heavy Scottish blend. If you've had something like Pig's Nose, or perhaps a slightly more neutral version of Johnny Walker Red Label, Cameron Brig, if you've had something like that, grain whisky. So, not awful, but not particularly character-filled, but it's something. Let's see how it tastes. Again, very thin and youthful. Watery caramel, like someone's got some good caramel and just put it into hot water. Getting a little bit of a barley sugar, refined sugar note. Again, slightly spirity, a little bit of coconut, kind of tired young grain whisky in tired casks. But again, very light, perhaps even more light and neutral than the nose. As for the finish on this one, caramel, grain, ethanol, spirity. I'm not going to say very short, but it's quite short. It's over quite quickly. Sweet with a lingering musty cardboardy note. So this is definitely better than what I remember from when it all started to get a bit awful and I stopped buying the stuff. But there's really not a lot in there. There's not a lot to write home about. It's not got a lot of flavours. I challenge anyone to write a large sheet of tasting notes for this, because it's not awful, but it's very simple. It's not particularly rough or immature, but it's just very limited. I can see why people would enjoy this though. I think it's very easy to drink, and I can see it being a very good mixer, which, to be honest, is part of the reason why I used to buy it nearly 20 years ago. Especially if you're looking for something to put into a mixer where you don't particularly want to taste the alcohol, you just want an alcoholic mixed drink. I think it's going to be very good for that. But on the other hand, that's probably largely because there is so little there. I think most spirits enthusiasts, like myself, like yourself, are going to find this quite boring. But at least it is good to see that it's a little bit better than what I remember. It didn't all completely go to crap. So let me know what you think about this one, what you think about Jamesons, and is this the kind of thing that you would ever buy for any reason? If so, why? If not, why not? Thanks for watching. Cheers.